Hi, I'm Kathryn Dapre. I'm Head of Engineering and Energy at NHS National Services Scotland. I'm not Director of an Energy Skills Partnership. I think that's in the programme. So unless my boss hasn't told me, and I'm going to go back to a shock in the office. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how we're taking a new approach to greening our estate, essentially within the NHS, and taking a much more strategic approach to it. Just a few facts and figures to get us started for those of you who aren't familiar with NHS Scotland. We are 22 boards, we are not trusts as they are down south, and the figures are up there. We've got a fairly large estate, about 1,500 buildings in total, just over 200 actual what we would term hospital sites. And our energy consumption for 13-14 was just under 2 gigawatt hours of energy altogether, and about just under 500,000 tonnes of CO2. In Scotland context, we are responsible for about 1% of all of the emissions in Scotland. It doesn't sound particularly high, but if you think about NHS and as an organisation, how we influence people, probably second only to local authorities, I would argue, in terms of the influence that we can have on people and what we do. So very much people look at us to set the bar. And why is it important for us? I mean, the obvious one is, well, we've got to do it. There's legislation out there. We are a public body. We're bound by the duties within the Climate Change Act. Like everybody else, we've seen our energy prices absolutely rocket. There's a report coming out shortly, our State of Assets and Facilities report, which I'm expecting some tough questions on because our bills have absolutely skyrocketed. Engineering resilience as well. You know, we do this because we want our sites to last a long time. The new Glasgow South has got some absolutely fantastic initiatives in there and technologies. So we do this to provide resilient estate for the health of the population going forward. But lastly, we do it because it's the right thing to do, and more, this is about our core business. One of the speakers this morning for WWF had picked up on, if we actually reduce emissions, there is a positive health impact on that. Fuel poverty has been mentioned over and over again, and that has a direct impact on health. And there is empirical evidence that if your buildings are better from an energy efficiency point of view, people in them are better, your employees, and in our case, our patients. So this is about our core business, it's not an add-on. So what have we been doing up until now? Each one of these pictures represents an initiative or group of initiatives that we've taken forward around installation of biomass, improved lighting, better new builds. We've been rolling out some renewables and new energy centres. And, you know, we're doing okay. Just in the last 5 years, we've seen our actual energy consumption down by 7% and our emissions down by 9%. We're well ahead of where Scottish Government would like Scotland to be in terms of our targets. If you track it right back to 1990, we've actually already hit where Scotland would want us to be by 2020. So it does kind of beg the question, well, if we're doing so well, why do we need a strategic approach? And there's a lot of reasons for this. We need to be more proactive. We have a tendency to, we get in a bit of money, everybody in the public sector will know this, you've got to have it spent by the end of the financial year. So you do what's quick and what's easy, not necessarily what's the best thing to do. And we do things piecemeal, so we put in a very good lighting system, but we don't tackle the building, or we put in a very good lighting system and then the following year we do something else and the two technologies conflict. So we need to be taking a better and more proactive approach to this. The quick wins for the most part have gone for us, certainly within NHS. We have got a fantastic group of energy managers who are doing a really good job, and as you know, you can see from the figures, we've done a lot, but it's starting to tail off, and it is now the step change and the big spend to save measures that we need to take if we are going to hit, let's think now about 2020, 2027, 2050 targets. For us particularly, we're seeing reducing capital costs. The capital budget that we have to play with to do our energy projects is reducing, and certainly for the next 2 to 3 years will be prioritised towards getting rid of our significant and high-risk backlog maintenance rather than standalone energy projects. So you may think, well, why can't you just borrow? And I know the presentation from Salix this morning was talking about access to loans, and we should be doing that rather than grants. That's great. We can't borrow money. The NHS boards in Scotland are legally constituted. We are not allowed to borrow, so we cannot use Salix. We can't use any loan scheme at all, even if it's interest-free. So that really restricts where we can get our funding from. So we've been looking at things like energy performance contracting. We've got 3 projects going through at the moment with the Carbon and Energy Fund that are absolutely fantastic and are going to lead to really significant savings for the boards which, where they're going in. But we're hitting some issues with accountancy treatment. They must be, without going into too much legal and financial speak, they must be off-balance sheet revenue funded. We can get them through at the moment on operating leases, but anybody familiar with this will know that IFRIC are changing the rules. Operating leases are being phased out. It's not future-proofed. So that avenue has gone. And we also have, I've put long and complex there, I was being polite, we have torturous approvals routes within the NHS. And, you know, again, I think a previous presenter mentioned behavioural waste. We've got bags of it. It takes months, if not years, to get projects through. It's the only organisation I've worked for where you have committees that agree to take things to another committee. And we have projects that get mired for months in approvals, and then we might miss one meeting, we get bumped off the agenda 2 months before that committee meets again, you know, and each time that's avoided waste. We are sitting with energy projects that could happen, so we need to be better at tackling that. So we decided we would take the strategic programme, fundamentally asking 2 questions. First of all, what is it that we needed to do? Because people kept saying to me, how much money do you need? And I actually couldn't give them the answer. And how are we going to do it in a context where we've got no money and we can't borrow it and we can't do a standard energy performance contract? So the first thing that we did, and if you take nothing else out of my presentation today, people in the public sector or people with large organisations, get to know your estate and do the big energy audit piece. This was the most useful piece of work we did. We did it over the tail end of 2013 and into early 2014. It took about 6 months in all. We energy audited our entire estate. Well, certainly the bigger sites in our estate. We did all of our acute hospitals, which account for 2/3 of our energy consumption, and as many other sites, high priority and poor performing as we could, as the budget would allow. We spent about £500,000 doing this, and it was really, really useful. Essentially, we identified in the region of about £240 million of capital works that we needed to do. Interesting for us, big proportion of that in fabric and glazing. That's a problem, which I'll come back to later, but, you know, big things that we could still do around lighting and biomass and other potential control systems, things like that. So we've now got this master database of projects, and that's informing this STEEP programme, the Strategic Energy Efficiency Programme going forward. So we've got project lists. The reason I've got an asterisk there is because this is a moving feast. We are continuing to audit the estate as we get funding. We've had a lot of help from Resource Efficient Scotland in that. So as we get help from them or as we free up more funds, we constantly audit and add to this list. So we've got this massive big project database now, about £240 million worth of projects identified. And if we did all of it, if we implemented everything, we would have hit way over our 2027 targets. Everybody's happy. But we come back to how are we actually going to deliver it in a context where we've got no money and we can't borrow it and blah, blah, blah. So we did we came up with, we started working with Scottish Futures Trust and with Scottish Government to try and find a way that we could tackle this. I won't do the bouncing ball on this, but we came up with a series of core objectives that the programme had to meet. Had to be something we could deliver all around Scotland, and we came to the conclusion that the delivery bit in the middle, we had to find a way of financing that satisfied the rules, but we also had to have a strategic development function or an intelligent client function, and this came back to the energy audits. You need to know your estate, know what you're asking for, and give people some of the solutions that we came to are very complex legally and financially, and our energy managers, bless them, are great from a technical point of view, but they need that support to walk them through these very complex forms of contract. So that's what we came up with, this outline business case. It was approved by ministers at the beginning of December. And within that, what we've stated is we need to have a national framework. That's going out, Stephen Veer mentioned it this morning, that is going to PQQ this week, so if there's any contractors interested in getting on that. And that's going to allow us to look at sites on a multi-technology basis. So rather than saying we want to buy a boiler, it's we want to reduce that site's energy consumption by 30, 40, 50%. You tell us, Mr. Contractor, how you're going to do it. We want to have an enhanced client function, so that's work at my department, probably extending that so we get a bit more expertise in, and that we're able to do that more detailed technical, legal, financial support. Key thing is a new contract, new form of contract, and it's a service concession form of contract. This will satisfy our auditors, this will satisfy IFRIC and those things. It places more risk on funders. I'm sure Gregor's going to have something to say about that later, but if we can get that form of contract rolled out, that is something that we can use. And it's a guaranteed savings model, so it puts the bonus on the contractor. If you tell us you're going to save us 20%, you will save us 20%, or you give us a fat cheque. The financing of this is still something we're working on, Gregor, so we'll that's watch this space. But it's not a panacea. The whole programme, that 240 million, the red bit is what we think we'll manage through this programme. The wee tiny green bit in the middle is anything that's under 2-year payback from that big audit piece that we did. So we're really expecting the boards to just go ahead and do that. That's the remaining quick wins. But then there's these smaller projects, and more importantly, there's this big building fabric piece. The smaller projects, we will not attract investment to do 10k, 20k, 50k projects. We need something like Salix that we can use so we can do these smaller projects. And that big bit at the top, the building fabric works, service concession contracts, it's very hard to get building fabric work, glazing work, that kind of thing on those kind of contracts. So again, we've got that big, to quote another phrase, elephant in the room, of about £100 million worth of fabric work that we need to do. Now, if we can argue it's backlog maintenance, possibly, but you know, that thing, so we've still got some way to go. It's also important to note that this is not in isolation. So STEEP is one element of 6 things that we're trying to do to green the NHS. Behaviour changes in there, we've all been talking about it. We're very good at talking to our estate staff, but we're now trying to engage with our clinical staff to get, again, to get them to realise this is part of our core business. Making tougher newer build standards, so new build standards within NHS are tougher than the standard building regulations, and we're continuing to do that. Looking at more opportunities for big scale renewables, community models, that kind of thing. Our equipment, again, is one of our elephants in the room, so working again with our clinical colleagues to look at the sustainability and the energy consumption with our medical equipment and seeing if we can tackle that. And also looking at our PPP schemes and making them more accountable for their energy performance, which is something that we've not been very good at doing in the past, so trying out, certainly with newer PPP schemes, ensuring that they take energy consumption seriously. And I think that's me. Take questions later.